You got to wear it for with dignity. How it was
Luck is beautiful.
I said, sing it along.
Luck is beautiful.
Say, I'm black and proud. It's high time that we get rid of that old slave mentality.
And a very good evening to you, and welcome to our Friday edition of Politics 101. Tonight, it's Black Matters. Black Matters tonight on a Friday night, the day after Mashramani. And of course, you know, our Mashramani celebrations coincided with the anniversary of the 1763 revolution. And it was one of those revolutions in the age of revolutions. Some of our historians like to talk about the rebellion or revolt and whether the 1763 rebellion was a failure and all that nonsense. Now, history, one thing Walter Rodney has taught us, and he was one of our premier, if not our premier historians. And he said that history must serve a function, a function. And you know, when we are Caribbean people, we are Guyanese people, and we look at something monumental that was done by our foreparents, and we try to be quote unquote objective, and we're not telling the real story about our history. The Americans, nobody can tell the Americans that what they did in 1766 was not the American Revolution or the start of the American Revolution. No one can deny that the French Revolution of the same year was the French Revolution, because the Americans and the French always let us know that. And of course, the Haitian Revolution, around C.L.R. James, had to write a book called The Black Jacobins that told the real story of that revolution. And he argued that it was a revolution, that if the white Jacobins in France could call their actions that of a progressive revolution, then what the Haitians did was on even keel, hence the Haitian Revolution. And 1763 preceded 1766. And our people held the Berbice. These were people who were still enslaved. Those who created the American Revolution were not enslaved. French who created the French Revolution were not enslaved. The Haitians were enslaved. Kofi and his band in Berbice were enslaved. They were creating a revolution out of slavery. That is why it's a revolution. So when you're doing comparative analysis, you have to be very careful not comparing oranges and breadfruit. Last night I spent my time listening to a very important lecture given by Orlando Patterson, contemporary of Rodney and Norman Gorfin and our own Gordon Rolle, who passed away the other day. They were all at Queen's College together, and UWI. And Dr. Patterson, who is famous in Black studies for the concept of social death. Social death. He argued that not only did Africans suffer physical death, but even when they were not dying physically, it was social death. That you wake up every morning and you're not working for yourself. You can't brush your teeth if you want to. You can't go and take a stretch if you want to. If somebody is controlling you, that you may be alive, but in a social sense, you're dead. And so he came up with the concept of social death. And he did this brilliant analysis, comparative analysis of slavery in the United States and slavery in Jamaica. It was the first distinguished Rex Nettleford lecture he was given 2 weeks ago. And his argument was that in America, they fed their slaves better because there was food around and so on and so forth. And they were producing a lot of food in the United States. So they could afford to feed their slaves better. And in Jamaica, they also could have afforded to feed their slaves better. They could have bought food from the United States and did buy food from the United States. But they didn't feed their slaves well in Jamaica. At one time, they didn't feed the slaves at all. The slaves had to feed themselves from the little patch that they planted on the outskirts of the plantation. So the responsibility for feeding the slave was put on the slave themselves. You all listen good to what I'm saying. This was the approach of the Jamaican slave masters. And they had to abandon that at one point because the slaves were eating what they were planting, but they couldn't plant meat or they couldn't plant fish. And the malnutrition stepped in, and the Jamaican slave masters still did not abandon that approach. And so on the question of feeding their enslaved, and as a result of that, economists have concluded that had the Jamaican slave master fed their slaves better, at the same level as the American slave masters were doing, the Jamaican population today would have been 6 million. And the argument, therefore, the Jamaican population is about 2 million, 2.5 million. It meant that there was genocide. They practiced genocide because they willfully killed the people. I found that so fascinating, that analysis by Orlando Patterson. And so his argument that in Jamaica, and by extension the English-speaking Caribbean, there was not just slavery, but there was genocide. And so, as we make comparisons, and no, he was not saying that the American slave masters fed their slaves well. In fact, they didn't feed them well. But even at that standard, at the Jamaican slave masters fed those who were enslaved in Jamaica at that minimal level, the Jamaican population would have been between 6 and 7 million. And so almost we can argue by today's standard that there was genocide of almost 5 million Black people in Jamaica. And if we extend that to the rest of the Caribbean, we would find the numbers would increase. And so therefore, we have to be very careful. I warn young people, young historians, young scholars of using the standards by which others assess their society and their history to assess our society and our history. You know, in our country, Guyana, Trinidad, Suriname, we have large Indo-Guyanese populations, large Indo-Guyanese populations. And in our quest sometimes for multi-ethnic solidarity, we tend to make the comparison between Africans and Indians. And it's generally a farce, a false comparison. Because having experienced slavery, Black people come to the world with that experience. The Indian doesn't come to the world with that experience. There's a way in which the Indians can say, let us drive only with the mirror in front of us. Let's just look in front of us. Let's don't look back. And I hear black people with that nonsense. Given our history, we have to drive with both the mirror in front and the rear view mirror. The other ethnic groups that came later could afford themselves that luxury to some extent. You know, there are all kinds of scholarship now. In the United States, you can predict how many people in a particular area would vote for the Republicans. They did it with Trump. How many people in particular areas of the South voted overwhelmingly for the Republicans and for Trump? And when they trace back, they found that those were areas of intense slavery. Amazing scholarship. And so that there is a relationship between the way white people vote today and the level of slavery in their area. Even the violence. Jamaica, for example, our Guyana, and other parts of the Caribbean. Slavery was violent when compared with some other areas. In fact, they used to send slaves who behaved bad in the south of the United States to the islands, Jamaica in particular. They used to send them there as a form of discipline. And when you look at the violence in our society, and you trace it back to the violence of slavery, then you understand the impact of slavery on our societies and on black people and white people. But in the sense that our brown brothers and sisters were not part of that slave thing, we have to look at the violence that comes out of their society from a different perspective. Violence, a different kind of violence that comes from our different ethnic groups. So in our haste sometimes to create this one people, one nation, one destiny, or as these little boys are calling it now, one Guyana, we sometimes mix our methods up. I was on a program a few nights ago, myself, Dr. Blackman, and we had a couple of the Indian brothers there, and we were discussing Forbes Burnham. And both myself and Dr. Blackman were arguing that to understand Burnham, we cannot have a narrow perspective, a narrow scope. That we have to understand Burnham at various levels, at the level of the party, the level of the country, the level of the region, the level of the world, to get a full appreciation of who he was. And that he may be all the things that we said he was. But if we confine it just to the level of government, then we will conclude that he was the best thing since sliced bread. Because he had a progressive social policy. If we confined it just to his foreign policy, he would be a wonderful guy. If we bring in the way in which he managed power, then we begin to get a more nuanced understanding of him and a more nuanced understanding of that generation of leaders. You see, C.L.R. James talked about time, place, and person. And if you just think about person and not the time and the place, you can go wrong. So here we were, all right? And I made it very clear that Burnham was the victim of the activism of my generation and the generation just before me, and we were the victims of his authoritarianism. But I refuse to analyze Burnham from just that narrow perspective. Because if I do that, I will come to a conclusion that will not say much about my own activism, because the activism has to be linked to the target of the activism, and the authoritarianism has to be linked to the target of the activist. And there we were, saying that, look, 40 odd years after Burnham was died, we have to go that way. And the Indian brothers kept saying Burnham was a dictator. And, no matter what we do, we put lipstick on a pig, is still a pig. And I found it so crass. But at the end of the program, I came to realize that those brothers cannot, in a sense, understand where I am coming from. I revealed that some of us, when Burnham died and filed around his casket, that Brother UC had gone, and they found it. They didn't know that. And they wanted to know the reason. And I remember the time Brother UC schooling us on African philosophy and the way we deal with conflict and death. And I realized that my Indian brothers and sisters could not relate to that. They could not relate to the fact that you would fight in a village, but you would be the first person at the wake when the person dies, or be at the funeral. That there is something about the lived experience of the African, that we deal with internal conflict in a particular way from different ethnic groups. And I realized those brothers simply did not understand that Burnham was, to them, not deserving of a nuanced analysis. He was just a simple black boy who was either a dictator or a good man. The complexity they could not understand because they were not prepared to afford him that. And I made the point that when Jagan died and they were only stopping at Indian villages, our village, Buxton, stopped the procession. I said he was our president too, making the point that there's a kind of humanity that comes with such an action. I'm not saying other groups don't have humanity, but they come at it different. So in a larger philosophical sense, we may be simplistically trying to get Indians and Amerindians and black people to act in a certain way, and maybe it's unfair to them because we are not taking into consideration our socialization that come out of our experiences. That I can say that, and I can say this for a lot of my brothers, it is not that brothers and sisters, that anybody forgot what Burnham did to the WPA and so on. But I can tell you it is never a talking point among us. My son, who is now 30 odd years old, asked me when I was home for Christmas, man, I didn't know that you all used to fight Burnham so bad, man, and he used to fight you all down. And I still told him, yes, and he said, how come you never mentioned that to me? And I came to realize that indeed it is not a talking point with me and my children, in a sense that we come to conflict from a different perspective, always searching not how to use the conflict to influence the future in a negative way, but how to use the conflict, the past conflict, as a lesson as to how we move forward. That is why they would tell us Rodney turning in his grave and all that nonsense. And if Rodney were alive, what he would do. And none of us can know what Rodney, the individual, would have done if he were alive today. One thing, if we want to have a sense of where Rodney would have been on this issue. We have to look and see where Rodney's comrades in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean, the African radical left, where are they today? It is not just WPA that is working with their former foes. Tim Hector worked with the birds. Trevor Monroe is now a part of the PNP in Jamaica. Members of the NJM are now part of the big parties in Grenada. In Trinidad, the Black Power workers who almost overthrew Eric Williams are now in solidarity with the PNM. And so if you want to know where Rodney would have been today, you have to look to see what the legacy of Rodney's activism and scholarship, where it is now. You see, one thing we know about Walter Rodney, history did not stop in 1980 when he died. And they've stopped history when he died. In fact, they say all the time, when Rodney died, the WPA died and the struggle died. And there can be nothing more insulting, but they can do that and say that without realizing how much they're denying Walter Rodney's rightful place. They're saying that to understand him, you have to go to 7480. He's not relevant before or after. Welcome, Politics 101. Welcome to Black Matters. Black does matter. And blacks do matter. And black matters are as important as white matters. Because if there were no blackness, there would be no whiteness and vice versa. And black matters are important, are very important. What they've tried to do, wherever blacks are, is try to delegitimize blackness and to put it at the periphery of our conversation. In fact, it's not polite conversation to talk about news. I heard one commentator on Dopespan last week was talking about the two quarterbacks. And he was saying, oh, how wonderful it was that for the first time we had a Super Bowl with two black starting quarterbacks. And then he says, you know, black people excel in anything that has to do with strength and so on. And oh, nothing is wrong with that. Other people should not feel bad because Asians excel in business. And I said, listen to this big man parroting racism and not being conscious of it. That blacks don't excel in sports because of our strength. So what happens when a strong Chinese man come along? What you gonna say? That we excel in sports because of our socialization. Because sports was one of the few arenas that was open for us to prove our humanity, our equal humanity. It had nothing to do with our strength. It had to do with our sense of where opportunities are and develop skills there. But here is that man preaching biological racism. And he either doesn't know or he knows, but he doesn't care. That is why they don't want us to be in the public speaking. Because the objective is to say that black people cannot do business. So therefore, when the government does not include black people in contracts and so on, or they do not spend money to develop opportunities for business in the black community, they're right, because they're wasting their time. Those people will never learn business. So you saw influence policy And so if you convince yourself, because this man, I think, is a preacher. If you convince yourself that black people can't do certain things, then you don't spend money on that. Sisters and brothers, we've got work to do, but I can guarantee you that that work is going to be done because some of us have dedicated some of what we do to that work. There are other fights. We still have to fight imperialists. We still have to fight foreign businesses. We still have to fight negative forces in our own community, black community. We still have those fights. We still have to fight the fight for more gender equality for women, and those fights are there. But it is not one or the other. Because if we fight for the liberation of the black man in Guyana, it includes the black woman. If we fight for the liberation of the black person in Guyana, it includes, for the most part, the working class Africans. The working class Africans. C.L.R. James always said about Trotsky, the great Russian theoretician, socialist theoretician, who ended up in Mexico. And the Russian agents, Soviet agents went there and killed him in 1940. But James always said, because James was a Trotskyite, he followed Trotsky, but he said, I had to go to Mexico and I had to teach him and school him on the Negro question because I realized he didn't know anything about the Negro question. So the black Marxists must be a different kind of Marxists from the European Marxists. Because the black Marxists must grapple with the essence and the history of the black experience in a way that the Europeans doesn't have to grapple with it, or the European Marxists will come at it from a European perspective. So when they say David Hines and Lincoln Lewis and Takuma Gunse, everything is race to them, well, slavery was not about class. It had class consequences. Slavery was not about gender. It had gender consequences. Slavery was primarily and essentially about black skin, starting with black labor and ending with the decimation of black spirit, black humanity. You all hear me tonight? Hear me? This is Black History Month. We have to be strengthened, not just in a physical way, but also intellectually. Because they believe we are just emotional people. That Europeans reason, black people are emotional. Well, I would not want to give up my emotions, but because I'm human, my emotions flow from my thought. And the actions that come from that emotions replenishes my thought. Good evening, brothers and sisters. We are doing it tonight. Welcome. Welcome to all of you to Black Matters. I've got friends tonight, Lincoln Lewis and Takuma Ogunse. What I was talking about tonight, they know more about it than me. I was a small boy when Ogunse and Moses Bhagwan and Clive Thomas and Walter Rodney would come to Buxton. 1973, 74, the cricket game done early. You gone to the line top and they talk for 1 hour, you understand 10 minutes. But the 10 minutes proved to be so important. So important. And as a small boy, I heard about Stephen Lewis. you know, and them fellas in Linden, trade unionists. So we got workers to do our work. Good evening and welcome. My brother says here, good evening, doctors, and welcome to all intelligent viewers and listeners. I love that. I love that. I love that. The native intelligence of our people is second to none. And our great thinkers and great theoreticians have always placed a lot of store on that native intellect. Other than that, where does my intellect come from? It just dropped from the sky? Somebody opened it and put it in there? No. My intellect, your intellect, all of our intellect comes from our socialization. Our socialization. By those around us. Around us. They didn't get a chance to go to university or to write books. That is why we are doing it now. We are taking their experiences, their wisdom, and putting it in books and calling it scholarship. Good evening and welcome to Black Matters. Black Matters. Black Matters. If you join us from Mocha, welcome. You're joining us from Den Amstel, welcome from Golden Grove. Well, they're under attack again, Golden Grove. If you're joining us from West Bobis, there's a reason they're going after West Bobis, you know. I keep saying that it's one of my favorite areas, you know, because the West Bobis is a feeder. You can't have a Linden without West Bobis, you know. You can't. And there's a reason that they're targeting that place. It's a particular place. Eh? If you don't understand that place, I remember Ogun could bear this out when he comes on. When in the heyday, the WPA would go to West Bobis. We behave differently in West Bobis. The speakers have to shuffle up when you go to other areas. And there is something about West Bobis that teaches us about ourselves and that points in a certain direction. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. Let me bring in my friends, Lincoln Lewis and Takuma Ogunsi. Gentlemen, brothers, good evening.
Good evening and welcome to your viewers.
And so I spent a little time because I had something come at chest. And as old people say, my stomach no bank house. He said, you have a part of in two. You know, part for eat and part for famine. That part your stomach in two. Is there anything, Brother Ogun, that you want to expand or reiterate that I said that caught your attention in my introduction? And same to you, Brother Lincoln, when Ogun is finished.
Okay, David. It's a number of issues, but I only will use two for the time being so that we have time to discuss other things. Now, the point you made about the way Africans, deal with internal dispute, I want to point out that UNITA and MPLA in Angola, for years they fought a bitter civil war. And when the MPLA government killed the UNITA leader, they had a national funeral for him, a state funeral. The whole nation came together, and I think, I mean, that was a clear example that Africa was speaking to the world that we are different, we are different in some respects. The next point you raised, which I think is important, is that Africans in Guyana has the burden because of history, okay, to redefine and define ourselves in a way that Indians and Amerindians don't have to. And very often, you know, they're not conscious of the burden that we have as a people who are enslaved and stripped to their culture. And they engage us in a very simplistic way. You know, I remember when we were again fighting with the PPP against Burnham. We were in solidarity with the Indian community. We never agree 100% with the analysis of the political situation fully, but we never question their declared feelings of oppression and victimization and dehumanization, however they define it. We never question it. Even though we didn't agree 100%, we never question it. And I'm amazed that people like Rafi Dev and all them will want to lecture to Africans today and telling us how we must behave. But they're not lecturing to the Indians, as we will get to when we discuss Woody Park, and so. Their duty is to lecture to their people about their people's behavior. We lecture to our people about African behavior and we set up some parameters. Okay, those are the 2 points I really want to make coming out of your approach. You lost me. I'm off, David.
Here we go. I think Brother Lincoln, is there anything in my introduction that you would like to elaborate on or reiterate?
Let me just make a point, to the viewership. As you've said, building on what you have said, let me put it this way. Our history can only be understood by us. And we can only look for support or some level of empathy to those who constructively examine our history. You know what irks me is that every time we take a position on an issue that we feel that impact negatively on ourselves and our community, we end up where people want to tell us how we must behave. And I see the talk about how you must behave as grounded in slavery. And I don't believe we should tolerate it at any point. You know, the slavery has been considered the worst act against humanity. But if we talk about slavery, the consequences of it, and what we would like to be corrected, people will tell you, people from other races will tell you, slavery gone. Forget it and let's move on. But the Jews, Holocaust, the Jewish Holocaust, not as big as us, but it is being discussed every day in every synagogue, in every continent. What has been done to the Jews? So what? The Jewish history and the consequences, that the consequential effect of the Holocaust are more important than slavery and the consequences of what slavery has done to us. We should make it very clear. And let me say to you, our black leaders, African leaders. We must force them into the position where this issue of slavery, reparation, and all these things must be, they must be unashamedly pursue reparation and other forms for what has been done to us. I believe we have to tell them. We have to tell every government, be it the PPP or whosoever lead it. You see it right here. When you talk about discrimination against the African community here, who the government puts out to say that there's no discrimination? They put out the black ministers. That's something that we need to look at. We need to understand what is happening to us. And I'm saying to you, let me reiterate, we have to hold the African leaders who are in the formal system their feet to the fire. We cannot relent. We cannot retreat. And we cannot surrender. Nobody will do it for us.
Lincoln Lewis there, here tonight. Welcome to Black Matters. My guests tonight are Lincoln Lewis and Takumo Ogunse. Lewis, of course, trade unionist, General Secretary of the Trade Union Congress. Takumo Ogunse, long-standing member of the WPA colleague of Walter Rodney and one of the leading members of the Working People's Alliance. Brothers, let's talk about Golden Grove, because we spent a lot of time in Golden Grove when that young man was killed. And the people in Golden Grove themselves spent weeks on the road drawing the attention of Guyana and the region and the world to the continued dismembering, if you will, of the black body and the black mind and the black soul. And we thought that the matter had died down and that we were waiting to see what justice will come forth, and then perhaps the people of Golden Grove and others would then go on the road again. Well, no justice has come forth, but all of a sudden, almost 8 months later, we picked up the newspapers last week and we saw the faces of young black men and not so young black men being paraded that they're wanted by the police for terrorism. For terrorism. And right away we said, so here we go again. Here we go again. No justice for that young man's family, no justice for that village, but you're assassinating that young man again by charging his fathers, his brothers for terrorism. Takumo Ogunse, you wrote a long letter in the newspapers yesterday, and I noticed today some cockroaches came out of their holes and are trying to yap. Talk to us about how you see that development in Golden Grove and the central point that you made in that letter, which is the criminalization of black protest, which itself has consequences for the criminalization of the larger black community. Over to you, my brother.
Yes, David. Just quickly on the letter, what I found very significant and striking is that the editor of Starbuck News knocked out the word apartheid from the letter. I was glad that he published it because I don't get nothing published in Kaishur. Somehow my computer and them don't work. After many years, everything I sent to them always come back as failed mail, you know. I try all what I could do and advise the technicians, but somehow I don't get nothing there. So I was glad that they published it, but I found it interesting that an editor, you know, would, and And I must say that an Indian editor, in the context of our discourse on apartheid, would decide to knock out that word in the most innocent use of the word. Is striking. It shows you how deep the problems of race and racial insecurity is in the country. But going back to the Golden Grove issue, I have went to pains because I'm around long enough, and I've studied the PPP's behavior since they came to power in '92. And it was clear to me that they have developed an approach to African protests. We came out of the colonial period with a political logic that says, look, in the rural areas, in the sugar belt and the rice belt, the PP is strong. The lumpian elements in those areas all rally behind the PPP to help to support the PP politics and Indian interests. In the rural areas in the African community, the African lumpian and so rally behind the African party, and so that is what we came out the colonial period with that recognition. And no government ever seek to criminalize the protest behavior of the other side to the extent to which the PPP took it, beginning from 1992. And this started when Chedi Jagan returned to power. It didn't start when Jagdeo came on the scene. And I'm making this point because I want to put a greater responsibility to what followed on the top historical leader of the PPP, both of them, Jagan and his wife. And their approach to deal with Africans, and they say, it is being rumored in PPP circle, is that Chedi and the PPP never overcome the fact that the government was overthrown by African protests in the city in the 60s. And for them, every manifestation of African protests, it's an intent to overthrow the PPP, and they decide the best way to deal with that is to criminalize it. And that's been a consistent approach. And they've also decided that you have to deal with it brutally. You shoot at nurses, peaceful protests, So you had a high price on protests. So if anybody want to think about protests on the PPP, it had reached a point where even our leaders were questioning whether we could engage in protests, without being shut down by our own people in the police force. I mean, that is the level, which the reality of African protests has reached in Guyana. And we saw in Suriname. Suriname had a number of protests, since independence, but you don't have the same response by the Suriname state. So the point I'm trying to make is that the PPP has been deliberately seeking to criminalize African protests. And for me, as I said in the letter, they're putting out wanted bulletins for those residents in Golden Grove. Is an escalation, of this PPP's attitude and assault to the African community. It's a political escalation, and we have to call it for what it is. And we have to develop from the African community and political leadership an appropriate response. You see, I am caught in a dilemma. Because I'm around long and I know how the conventional leadership of the African Party behave, I know if we're going to argue for certain things, you could bet the last dollar the PNC ain't going to do it. I'm conscious of that. Even if I'm wrong, I tell you where I stand. This is how my reading of them. And it puts you in an awkward position because you don't want to, the things that we need to do, they're not going to advocate it. And if you advocate it, they're not going to do it. You see, so that's the dilemma we are in. But the point I'm trying to make here is that this escalation is so significant that there should have already been a political response beyond just providing lawyers for those who turn themselves in. You know, we under political attack, but we seem incapable of giving political response that are appropriate to deal with the political offensive. And this is very worrying for me. And that is how I see Golden Glove. It's an escalation of the PPP deliberate, willfully hostility to Africans and to criminalize African protests in order to weaken us politically. Because it's not to criminalize African protests for the sake of criminalizing it. The goal is political. It's to take away from you one of your most important weapons in the social struggle, which we use from slavery to now, okay, to achieve whatever we achieve as an African community, as a nation, and as a region.
Takumo Gunse, Working People's Alliance member, Brother Lincoln Lewis, the developments in Golden Grove, Ogunse says it's an escalation of the attack on the Black community. What says thou?
Let me make it very clear that what the government recognized that in 2000 onward, when they could have put guns in people's hands and killed people in the street, bodies find bodies, you hadn't a politics 101, you hadn't a Kadaki network, you hadn't a Village Voice, you hadn't a number of Ben's Cop, and so forth. So they recognize that they will be exposed internationally for these shenanigans that they always be involved in. So what they do is that they decide now that if you protest in whatever form it is, we are going to deem you terrorists. We're going to charge you. We know down the road that the charges may not stick, but it will be as a deterrent to the other man who will want to protest. They want to kill protest totally, and they want to silence the African community. Let me tell you what happens over the years, what has happened. Whenever there are major national issues or resistance in this country, you look at the people who have been at the forefront and challenge every government. That group of people have been African people. And the PPP recognizes that they can't continue to take 75–80% of the wealth of this country and divide it among themselves all the time. So they now come up with their scheme that they are going to lock down protests in any form, lock down the African people from resisting. That's their modus operandi. They're not looking for justice. And all this thing when they talk about one Guyana means for them one group of people will get the cream and the other persons are going to get the water. The masses are going to get the water. They decide that they are going to protect that group who consider themselves that the country belongs to them. We have to come back. We have to fight back. We cannot allow this to happen. And what Gunsi made a very interesting point. But as it relates to when you will talk, if you will take a certain position, and how the other major political party, the PNC, will respond. He made a very important point. And we have a similar example of what is taking place, like in the United States, where you have the Republicans who don't have no respect for laws. They will tell you about constitution and laws, but they don't believe in it. They will not want to work with anybody or any group outside of them. You have to seek their way or no way help or no we get no way. Just the same, you have the PVP here who decide that it is their way and no other way. They will tell you about constitution, but they don't believe in it. They will honor it in the bridge. You negotiate with them, they will never want to honor the agreement that you come to. Just the same like the United States. And you have the Democratic Party, which has the Big Tent approach and what tells you about about human rights and trade union rights, the United Nations, the international conventions and laws. And you have the PNC here with the Big Tent approach. And we have tell you about the same, but similar things. The time has come that while we are talking about respecting all these conventions and laws, protocols and what have you, we have to move beyond that. We have to buttress that with some other form of action. If we don't do that, if we don't do that, then our constituency or the constituency that supports political parties like PNC, the black people primarily, will continue to get crumbs, and in some cases they get nothing. So I want to make the point that there must be action. The action must not only be.
Lincoln Lewis there. Brother Ogunse, you know, this thing is so startling and stark. You had on May 6th, people in Bad Settlement and Bushlot and Lusiknan on the streets. Out there in West Bobis, they were stoning children in their buses, school buses. They beat a policewoman, injured her, chased policemen, beat them. And the government at that time was the coalition government. The coalition government did not charge anybody for terrorism. In fact, it didn't charge anybody. And here you have another protest. And there was not that kind of behavior that we saw on March 6, 2020. But yet these people are being charged. Not for breaking up plans, terrorism. Even terrorism is a stain, is a stigma. It's a stigma. If you are a terrorist, you can't go to the United States. This has consequence of people traveling, for people's future, all of those things. Please comment on that for me, Brother Ogunse. Oh, let me bring Brother Ogunse.
Because the incident and the incidents that occur at Monrepo was orchestrated in the main by the PPP. You know, I mean, as I said, the thing is the Machiavellian politics. They another manifestation of how they deal with African protests, they criminalize it. So they planted the agents, they allowed the police to allow the protests to move from Golden Grove umpteen miles. And when they reached the Monipo market, where they had the agents planted and they had the scheme, they entrapped the people. But unfortunately, as these things happen, in the heat of the engagement, innocent protesters get themselves caught up in the thing. But this was a deliberate political action by the PPP. And having decided to attack their own people and inflict wounds on their own people, and then charge other people for terrorism, it shows the criminal mindset of the rulers. And it shows what we're dealing with. We have, look, the Golden Grove incident for me, have convinced me beyond any reasonable doubt that we can't have any intelligent and civilized discourse with the PPP leadership at present to resolve any Guyana problem. And the African community and African leadership has to come to the realization that while we want unity in a peaceful country, we're only going to achieve that unless we assert our political relevance. We have no economic relevance. They're challenging our social relevance. And we have to assert our political relevance so that our numbers and our sacrifices for this country counts. And I said many years ago, when I was at an AGDA meeting in BV, that unless there's sheer governance and a recognition of justice for Africans, there should be no Guyana. And I repeat it. This social contract that we struck at independence of Guyana, if it cannot give Africans justice, I don't want to speak here for the Amerindians because they got their own leadership. It is pointless. We go ahead with it. We have to put a stop to it and have a renegotiation. And we have reached a point where Africans have to prepare to throw all their political, social, spiritual, cultural might against the PPP to bring an effective resolution of the problem. I am arguing and I'm convinced that the PPP and the Indian community doesn't have the appetite, for the situation the PP leaders are creating. But it is working because the African weakness response is allowing it to work and giving it more potency. We could stop this thing tomorrow. We could make the PPP and the Indian community and the thinkers make an about turn tomorrow. There is no way in any part of the world where the people who are being oppressed have all the weapons in their hand. You're the majority in the army. You're the majority security force, and you oppress. If they want to charge me for treason, they could charge me for treason. But I'm saying, to the extent that this oppression continues, we are responsible for it. We could stop it tomorrow and prevent the country from going down the route that the PPP is setting Guyana up for. The last thing we really want is a civil war in the context of oil, where all them foreign missionaries will finance weapons to both sides. You got a perpetual slaughter, and we don't have the numbers for it. That is, for me, it is the duty of the African leadership and the African community to recognize the historical moment in political terms and to make a major investment to push the PPP back to reasonableness. It is not going to happen by rhetoric. It's only going to happen by major struggle, which will force a realization both in the country, the region, and the world that, look, something has to happen. A renovation again, a political situation to save the country and to allow the international people who are the eyes on Guyana and who define the interest in a certain way to create the environment for them. But I'm saying it is in our hands, and we have reached the point of no return. When Ali could tell the world the reason why he gave permission to smash up them poor people house at Mocha, because he wanted to prove that he's a tough lead, a president. He's not a weak president. I mean, what is that? You prove he's a strong president by standing up against the Venezuelans. When the Venezuelans come to your border and they violate your border, you go there and demonstrate he's a strong president. You demonstrate he's a strong president when the foreign governments, put you under pressure and you stand up to them. That's how presidents demonstrate that they're strong presidents. You don't demonstrate you're a strong president when you got to deal with 30 or 40 poor people. You send your army and your police, and your bulldozer, and you smash up the place. And then you come and stand to the world and tell the world that is your demonstration of what's being a strong president. You are bloody well coward. And that's what Ali. Ali is a coward. And I've always learned that a lot of bullies are cowards. When they try to bully you, carry back the same, you give them a taste of the medicine, they run for cover. And it's time that we have the Ali and the PPP running for cover. This city, Georgetown, and the area important centers of Region 4, where Africans have a major political standing, both in numbers and history and everything, is critical. And if they want coexistence in this region and this country, they got to change the colors. And they're only going to change the colors until we force them to change the colors. And to me, we have reached a point of no return. From here onwards, anything that's happened to us, we and our leadership are responsible. I don't want to hear from no one what the PP doing. We all know what the PPP doing. My concern is what we doing. The people will continue to do what it's doing. Once we continue to accept, okay, the brutality, the oppression, and we find a number of reasons why we can't resist. But soon as we start to resist, you think if when they send the bulldozer mock up or the charge those comrades, they were in 20 African community around the country, they were uprising. Public, I ain't talking about violence, political uprising, massive demonstrations, public meetings. You think they'll think about doing it again? But they do because they realize that we are not organized and we are not in a state to give appropriate responses, and that has to be the challenge. And you're not going to get there simply by lecturing to African people that you got to get there. You have to throw people into war, into conflict, into resistance and struggle. That's how you get there. Even the most so-called civilized countries, you don't go about the place to get a democratic vote upon where they go to war. The leadership make the decision, and the country go to war, and the people go to war. And we reached a point in Guyana where, in defense of African interests, and we have always made the point that I'm a disciple of that. There could be no true African liberation without the total liberation of all Guyanese, including Indians, Amerindians, and everybody. But we can't get there in this present condition. And to open up that possibility, we have to push back against the PPP and allow the Indian masses to decide what they're going to do with the PP leadership. I am not saying that the PP leadership, as bad as they be, if Indians continue to support them the way they support them, you have to live with the reality. Because Indians can't tell me who must be African leaders. And I don't think we got the right to tell Indians who must be the leaders. We inherit from the white colonial masters a political mindset and a worldview that is designed to keep us divided and ruling. We can't tell the Indians who must be the leaders. They can't tell me who must be the African leaders. So for me, the struggle is not to destroy the PPP and the Indian leadership if the Indians want them. The struggle is to force the Indians and Indian interests to force the leadership to modify the political behavior for the best interests of themselves and the country.
Takumo Gun said, real talk, as the young people would say. Real talk here tonight, no beating around the bush and trying to be diplomatic. We have passed that stage. We passed that stage. Not because we want to pass that stage, but because the PPP has pushed the engagement past that stage. And I want all of you here tonight to begin to think critically. To begin to think critically about what Brother Ogunse has just said. To think critically about it. Brothers, on March 6th, the people of Bushlat and Bad Settlement came out onto the streets and charged that the elections were being stolen from them, and they beat black people, stoned black children, assaulted black policemen and women. And 3 years later, we pick up the newspaper and we hear of a place called Woodley Park, which I understand is really an extension of Bad Settlement, that adults went into a school and literally beat black students out of that school. I call it ethnic cleansing. I think we have reached that point. They said that black people have no business. They assaulted teachers, abusing them. They said that they do not want black people in those villages. That is, for me, ethnic cleansing. The last time that occurred was in the 1960s during the Troubles, when people were either forced out of their communities or had to leave their communities. Now, we are not at war. In the 60s, we were literally at war. There may be a cold war going on right now, but not a hot war. And so, even in a cold war, people are beating people out of their villages, children. Ethnic cleansing, I think, has arrived here. I remember in 1992 when the PPP first came to power, and they went around the world and cleansed the foreign service of all black foreign service officers. They were cleansing black people from all the ministries. I remember that well. And some people said it was ethnic cleansing. Some of us felt it was too strong a description at that time. But I'm ready to call what I saw in Woodley Park ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing. This is not a case where the government is pushing people. Supporters of the government, with or without tutoring from the government, are pushing their brothers and sisters, beating them out of their villages. Lincoln Lewis, pay attention to me here, my brother. Talk to me. Talk to me, Brother Lincoln. It's your area. It's West Bobis. Is it ethnic cleansing or just a little skirmish?
David, let me tell you this. In 1992, when this process started, when I spoke to a few opposition politicians at Camp and Crow Street, I said, this is racial cleansing. And they tell me it's ethnic cleansing. I said, ethnic cleansing could have been religion and all these type of things. No, we don't cloak it. This is race. And they disagree with me. For also making a point, for too long, we keep our tongue in our cheek and we don't call a spade a spade. We have to start doing it. And we got to go right back. Even the churches, we got to call them out. Because these pastors that we have who are colluding with the government to put the African people in a very passive mode, we got to start dealing with them. Let me go on to things. Woodley Park is east of number 12. I talked about this issue and I write about it before. West of Woodley Park is Bad Settlement. In 1964, one Cyrus Britain, people invaded number 12 and Cyrus Britain was killed. The whole community, the village was held at ransom, held at siege. Two men, Cyrus London and another guy, his name was Bethu, they ran through the back of the village and walked on the train line and run to Fort Wellington. And the police and the soldiers came to release them. By the time they were there, Britain was killed already. His dead body was killed. Those people had to move out from number 12, the old community. That village has been taken over by East Indians since then. Even the cemetery that you have at number 12, you had at number 12, they start bulldoze the cemetery. And you know, we pay certain homage to our dead. They're bulldozing the cemetery and put prop building. So when you see that number at Woodley Park, is there anything new with them? But we will want to cloak it in another form. You said, David, that if I understand you well, it's not the government sending them to do. Who tell you it's not the PPP? They always get bottommost. Who tell you it's not them?
They're saying it's worse. The government for them, you could say that the fact that the government is not there and they're doing that says it's worse. It means that they've drunk from the bitter chalice of the government. Don't misunderstand.
Yes, let me give you. I see the Minister of Education put out a statement. What has been come beyond a statement? How can you believe? How can you take direction from a person who in the National Assembly had a rape when raping taking place? Think about, let me think what we into. The lawlessness. People have to be angry things. Look, you refer to you make reference to 2020 when they had the post-election. You see what happened at Bushlat? The community came out. Bushlat High School, this school at Bushlat, there are a number of African children who go to that school.
And teachers.
Right? Coming from as far as Belladrum and Rosignol, they're coming there. And the community came out and hold the road, block the road. Children can't come out. You know what saved them? The young men from Oaktown and the young men from Belladrum jump in some trucks and turn up there and was able to repel them in their own village. The people caused them to run away. So going to what you're talking about, action necessary. We can't allow these people to do this thing. Nothing is going to come out at the story at Woodley Park. You don't have to go very far. See how this thing operating. State agencies. State agencies such as what we call it.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something.
Yes, it is. I support you. Your position is racial cleansing. I learned about the Woodley Park, the details of it, basically on your program when you a few nights ago when you interviewed the MP, the PNC MP from the area, where he articulated the whole situation. That is where I get the forceful details of the thing. And I remember when the Henry boys were killed, I made the point on Walter Rodney groundings. Given the culture of those communities and given the PPP controlling those communities, the PPP must know who were the perpetrators of that crime. This time, you don't have to look for the perpetrators. There's known to the communities, known to the government, known to the police. And yet still we can't see no appropriate action, which speaks a million words. It shows clearly that the state and the PPP is involved in encouraging this kind of behavior. Because you don't have to look for the people. Everybody, the people are known. And they could only, they assault the children on the first day, told them that they're going to return to the school the next day at a particular time. Nothing was left to chance, and they returned exactly at that time and continue their terrorism. But there's no charges of terrorism. I mean, it speaks quite a lot of what we're dealing with. Look, on ethnic matters, I have been a practitioner in this area, and like my whole politics developed based upon ethnic reconciliation and etc. Because I think it is important for people who are all victims of white colonialism, white domination. I still believe in that in the main. But I can't, in the presence of a government that has created and continue to create an environment. You know, we got the historical problems of how the society was constructed by the colonial masters, the divide and rule, the competition among the ethnic communities. We got all of that. But we also got internal political behavior. And we as Africans have called Burnham and the PNC to book for political conduct. I still to hear Rafi Dev and them call the PP for book for those recent behaviors. You see that this is the double standards they got. And you know, and Rafi and them objectively probably stand as important players in shaping Indian political thought. And Rafi and Rove have a greater responsibility in this equation, because when Rafi and Rove came and began to be active in Guyana, they reconstruct the context of multiracial politics. And they argue that the WPA multiracial thing is not valid, and the WPA and black people can't speak for Indians. That intervention alter the political conception in a real way. And I remember one Indian Guyanese leaders in the WPA said that Rafi Dev have given the Indians an Indian ideological justifications of supporting the PPP. When historically the PPP was fighting for ideological justification, Marxism-Leninism, even though they encourage the Indian, they take a full advantage of all the cultural advantages and the religious advantages that they could translate to political support. But he gave them an Indian ideological justification. And I'm holding him to book. He has a greater responsibility than many in the Indian community. Okay, in light of this escalation of racial hostility against Africans, this apartheid reflexism mentality that we're dealing with, he has a greater responsibility to provide leadership to his people, not to lecture to Africans. Now, any government faced with what happened at Woodley Park would have took it as their responsibility at the highest level. President Ali is running into African communities, trying to lecture to them, trying to win support. He should be the first one to turn up there and in public condemn the behavior and call upon his supporters to act better. He didn't do that. The bully didn't do that. He's a bully for black people because black people love you for bully them. But he's not a national leader. We're not dealing at this historical moment with PPP leaders who are national leaders. We're dealing with political criminals who get into power and who get their hands on oil money and they get drunk. And they're not engaging. I don't like to get into PNC politics, but I see one of the PNC leaders here, the PNC should talk to, the enemies. The PP tell the PNC clear, I don't want to talk to you. Unless you recognize me, I win the election, the hell was you. I don't know, you must go on your knees, okay, and try to have a conversation with a man who's telling you, even if you want to talk to me, you got to talk on me terms. And I'm strong on this because I remember in dealing with Burnham and the PNC on the question of unity and how you deal with Jaguar and the PPP. One of our criticism of Burnham was that yes, he talked unity, but he wants unity upon his terms. And we were critical of it. And if I was critical of Burnham, the African leadership, I'm going to be 1,000 times critical of Jagdeo, Ali, and Nandala leadership. You can't in a multi-ethnic society when you deal with major problems that got the potential at any moment to rip the society apart, you can't be so high-handed and insensitive that you want discussions on your terms. As I pass, the Constitution doesn't provide for that. And on the whole question of this democracy, can't me understand the Constitution. The Constitution gave 2 ways for the masses to intervene. You intervene in election time, and in between the elections, if you're dissatisfied, you intervene by going on the streets and demonstrate. So the Constitution doesn't permit you only to, you can't wait elections every 5 years. But a lot of things will happen between the 5 years. And the way the people defend their interests is by intervening and making a public statement of their position. And the African community has to intervene in this political equation to save themselves and ultimately to save Guyana.
Lincoln Lewis, let me bring you in here. Your closing thoughts, Lincoln.
I want to say that the situation now requires more than just holding hands. It requires total mobilization of the African community. We have to fight, and we fight in whatever form necessary. We cannot sit down and wait. The only way the PPP will come to the table, they have to see, we got to bring them, do things to bring them to them. These guys decide, oppressors don't know when they're oppressing people, you know. They believe that what they're doing is normal, but these are oppressors. And it's only one language oppressors understand. You have to challenge them. And incidentally, Ogunsi made a point that the Constitution give you that opportunity or that right to intervene. The question of freedom of association, the question here of the right to protest, we got to take them on. We have to together not only hold hands and talk behind closed doors, we got to go to the streets. And the faster our political leadership understand that street is the only place we can end this matter, it will be better for us. Thank you.
Brother Takuma, your closing thoughts?
Well, I was hedging what, because on these matters, I like to be, as an African, I was guided by the spirit of the ancestors. And the ancestors will be jerking me, whether I should say what I want to say or no. But I'm going to say it because I think I get a sense that they're telling me to say it. Look, the June 12th, the so-called election day, should be a day of massive African protest. That's how we voting. We should be voting, use the election mobilization, okay? And I don't believe in this thing about secrecy. Don't tell me that we shouldn't talk. In modern engagement, politics is about public behavior. People wage war and tell you I'm going to bomb your cities. So they hide. I'm going to go and bomb your cities. So don't tell me that we mustn't say what we're going to do. We must tell the world and tell the country our approach to the local government elections is to turn June 12th into a day of African uprising, peaceful uprising, massive demonstrations and passing resolutions and shouting down, okay, where we stand. So we begin to redefine democracy, democratic engagement. That is the only appropriate political response to deal with the PPP, both for the local government elections and more important for the national elections, because the two are linked. Given the behavior in GCOM, what they're setting up here, you don't know the results. And you're only going to alter that, okay, by massive demonstrations of Africans, okay? And I think the July 12th should be the day of engagement. Those are my final thoughts, and I think the ancestors tell me to say it, regardless of how the others may behave.
Look what we're going to say. Saying here tonight that the local government election should be turned into a massive demonstration by African people and by extension, the supporters of the opposition. I want to throw my support behind that call because I think it's a just call and it's a just action. We've reached that point where we cannot allow ourselves to be dragged into a net that is going to catch us like fish and dispense of us. We've got to do something radical. We've got to let our leaders hear that. Those of you who are here tonight should carry that message. And it is something that I throw this program behind. That we have nothing to get from that local government. And that even if forces participate in the election, we have to make it very clear that they are limited, very limited benefits that can come from participating in those elections. But we have to use the election as a platform for righteous indignation. Thank you very much, my brothers. Tonight's program really hit it very hard. No beating around the bush, no slicing and dicing. We say it raw, rank. Thank you all, and thank you all for my audience for staying with us. We went over time, but it's our business. And I want to say that the struggle continues, and it must continue. And we stand here as witnesses that we've been patient, very patient. And our patience has not been repaid in the way that any responsible government should respond to patient opposition. We have reached that point. Good night. It's Mashramani weekend, so I guess some of you are going to have a little drink and so on, but the struggle continues. Thank you all. Love as always. And we come back on Monday to resume the struggle. We come back on Monday.